welcome back to my channel. I'm Huck. Today we are doing my August wrap-up. So we're talking about everything that I read in August. So I had one DNF in August, which my summer DNFs will be coming out very soon. So that'll be about all of the books that I didn't finish in June, July, and August. But I had one DNF and I read 6 books in August, which I'm feeling pretty good about. 3 of those were in a reading vlog that I did, so I will link that in the description if you're interested in watching it as a reading vlog format. But let's just get into it. So first of all, we'll start off with the DNF. So the book that I DNF'd was Hunted by Megan Spooner. This is a YA fantasy Beauty and the Beast retelling, and as I said, I'll be getting into it in my summer DNFs video. Then, oh, I have these in the opposite order of what I read. Okay, so the first book that I finished in August was A Prayer for the Crown Shy by Becky Chambers. So this is the second novella in the Monk and Robot series, which is a like hope punk sci-fi, very like soft and optimistic vision of the future. In this, there was a point in this world's history when they found out that robots were sentient, they had consciousness, and so people decided to set robots free, and they essentially kind of restructured the world so that people sort of let robots go off into the wilderness and have left wild spaces for the robots to live in, and then humans kind of like stay to their own areas. Our main character in the first book is Dex, who is a tea monk, which is essentially somebody who travels around and gives people tea and comfort. They're kind of like a traveling therapist. But Dex is having like a quarter life crisis, doesn't know what to do with their lives, and they're feeling very burned out even though they love what they do. And so they set out into the wilderness to kind of find themselves or figure out what they want to do, and while they're out there they encounter Moscap, which is a robot who has been sent by the other robots to contact humans and find out what do humans need. And so the two of them is about them, this is like first contact in, you know, like 100 years or something between humans and robots, and it's really about them kind of learning more about each other. And so in the second book, this one, we are just continuing to follow them as they travel around, continue to learn more about each other, and are traveling as Moscap is trying to find out what do humans need. And I really enjoyed the second book. I liked the first one, but I think I liked the second one even better. I don't completely know why. I think part of it is just that, you know, Dex and Moscap have known each other for a little bit longer, and so while they're still learning about each other, and like there's always more to learn about another person, there's like a little bit more of a established friendship and dynamic between them, which I enjoy. One of the things that I always like about the books in this series is that it includes a little bit of like, there's some like philosophical elements to it, you know. It talks about like what is personhood, what makes somebody a person, and how do we like respect different existences, I guess. And because they're like conversations about, you know, robots are not people, but Dex still is very respectful of Moscap, and just like it's just I just enjoy the little philosophical bits. It also talks about like our relationship to work and the function of work in society, because Dex is dealing with burnout, and they have this society that is based on the idea of like, you don't have to earn rest, everybody deserves rest, and yet Dex still feels guilty for taking rest, and it just has some interesting elements to it, and I just really enjoyed it, and it just was like very very soft and wholesome. So I think I gave this one 4 stars, but this is really my, I think I gave the first one 4 stars too, but this is my favorite of the two. And I really hope that she continues writing in this series. I am not sure if this is going to be continued. It definitely feels like the story isn't over, but I don't really know anything about the plans for this. So actually, if you happen to know about Becky Chambers' plans for this series, please let me know, because I hope there's more of it. Okay, after that, I also read Fool's Assassin by Robin Hobb. This is the first book in the Fitz and the Fool trilogy, which is the final trilogy in the Realm of the Elderlings. So this is like the 14th book in the Realm of the Elderlings. I'm getting so close to the end. I did just film a full like spoiler discussion about this book, so that will be coming soon. I think that will be coming after this video. Also, this is another one that I read in that vlog, so if you want some just like non-spoiler thoughts about it, you can watch it in the vlog. But overall, I actually really enjoyed this. I always enjoy Robin Hobb's books. Like, you know, it's always a bit of a mixed bag for me, but I think I just more consistently enjoyed this one than a lot of her other ones. I think there are a lot of reasons for that. One is just that we get another point of view. So this is one of the books that is following Fitz as the main character. And really, all of the Fitz books we've really just seen through Fitz's perspective, but this adds a second perspective, which I really liked. One, I just liked the character themselves, and two, I enjoyed seeing the story and seeing Fitz's character from another point of view, so we were not only in Fitz's head. I also liked that this book had a lot less plot than a lot of her other ones, because, you know, I've said many times that the things I like most about Robin Hobb's books are really like, I like her writing, I like this world, and I think her characters are really interesting. I think her character work is very interesting. And it's really the way that she plots her books and some of the plot choices that she makes that I dislike. That is where it gets a little dicey for me. But this book had very little actual plot to it and was really just about the characters. It felt much more like small in scope. It felt much more like domestic and just like a little bit about like the little dramas of these people's lives. And I just loved that. I had a great time because I was like, this is all of the parts I do like about her books without the parts I don't like, and it's incredible. So, you know, I was expecting to enjoy this, but I just enjoyed it a lot more than I thought that I would. So yeah, I gave this one 4 stars. All right, then what did I read after that? Next, I read The Beast Player by Noko Uhashi. So this is a reread for me. This is a YA fantasy that in it we're starting out with our main character Ellen, which actually I'm not sure how to say her name because, so the first time I read this, I read it physically. The character's name is spelled E-L-I-N, so I've been saying it Ellen. I listened to the audiobook for this and on my reread, and the narrator sounded like she was pronouncing it Edding, and so I'm very confused as to how that happened. So I'm not really sure what this character's name, how to pronounce this character's name. But in it, our main character, her mother is a caretaker for the Toda, which are kind of like sea serpents that are owned by like the royal family. The mother's one of the caretakers. Some of the Toda unexpectedly die and she is blamed for it, and then is killed as punishment. In her like last moments, she saves her daughter Ellen and kind of sends her away. And so Ellen is sort of like washes up on shore and is taken in by an old man who is a beekeeper. And so the first like third to half of this is about her essentially living with this like man who is a beekeeper, and he is teaching her about beekeeping, and it's very like idyllic, and she's like running through the meadows and watching the bees and all of this, and like very like meadowy atmosphere, which is fun. And then the story gets into her like learning how to be a caretaker for animals, because she learns that like she loves animals and very intuitively understands them. And so she goes on to more like formally learn how to take care of animals. And then that like gets her into other political issues. But I really enjoyed rereading this. I liked it the first time that I read it, but I had a couple of issues with it. One being that the first half of the book felt kind of different from the second half of the book, especially in terms of like scope of the story, and I didn't really like that the first time. However, since reading it the first time, I found out that this book was actually originally written as 2 books and then put together into 1 book, which is why there might be like a bit of a difference in the way the first half and the second half feel, because they were originally 2 separate books. And that's part of why I wanted to reread this, was because I thought that that would kind of change my expectations going into it, which I think it definitely did. And I just enjoyed it more having like knowing what to expect from it. On reread, I think I enjoyed different elements of the story. The first time that I read this, the first like third to half when she's like, you know, with the beekeeper was really my favorite part, because it had this great like nature meadow atmosphere to it, which I still enjoyed. But I think this time around I actually was much more interested in the plot of the story and the part where she kind of goes on and gets into like learning how to be an animal caretaker, and gets into the more like political elements of it. So that was just interesting upon reread to like get something different out of it and enjoy it. So I, the first time I read this, I think I gave it 3 stars. This time I bumped it up to 3.5. So yeah, glad that I reread it, and now I can go on to reading the second book. Okay, my camera, the battery is flashing at me, so we'll see how far I can get with this. But the next book that I read was an audiobook. I listened to The Reverb Silver by S.A. Chakraborty. So this is the short story collection that is set in the world of the Daevabad trilogy. And so we're getting stories about different characters, some characters that we have met before and some characters that we haven't. Some of them are getting backstory, some of them are just kind of fleshing out moments that we may not have seen before. One of the things that I liked about the way that this book was like set up or kind of integrated into the trilogy is that before each short story, it would tell you like where in the timeline this happened. Like, did this happen before any of the books in the trilogy? Did it happen between the first book and the second book? Like that kind of thing, which was really helpful to sort of orient in the story where each of these short stories happened. And it also told you if there were any spoilers. Now, for me, like I wouldn't have read this book until I completed the full trilogy anyways, but I still thought that that was very like interesting and thoughtful, that it included whether this was a short story that had no spoilers for the entire series, or like it would have spoilers for the first 2 books or the whole full trilogy or things like that. So I just liked the way that it was set up in that way. This had a little bit of a rough start for me just because the first couple of short stories were not ones that I really cared about that much. Like the very first one is about Meniza, and honestly, don't care about Meniza. Not a character that I'm very interested in. And then there were like a couple of stories about characters that I either wasn't particularly into or like characters we hadn't met before, so I just like, I don't know. But then it got into the stories that were about some of the main characters. Like we got more stories about Nahri, Ali, Mutadir, Jamshid. Like I really liked getting the short stories about their characters and the things that just sort of fleshed out. There were a couple of things that were background stories, not about them, that I also enjoyed. But my favorites were really the ones that were about like those main characters that we followed in the story, because I already cared about them, you know, I already want to know, and it's just fun to like get more about them. But yeah, overall, really enjoyed this collection, and I don't generally rate short story collections, so I didn't give this one a rating, but I did really like it. And if you have read and enjoyed the Daevabad trilogy, definitely think that this is worth reading. Next up, I read Heart's Blood by Juliet Marillier. This is another reread for me, and this also was a buddy read. I read this with Kara, and it was very fun to get to chat about this. It was a reread for both of us, so it was interesting to like reread something together. Although even though I was rereading this, like I remembered almost nothing about this book going into it. So I was like, I can't tell, are just like memories coming back to me, or am I like predicting things and figuring stuff out as we go? I don't know, but I had a really good time reading this. So this is a standalone historical fantasy Beauty and the Beast retelling. In it, our main character is Katrin. She is a scribe, and at the beginning of the story, she has escaped her abusive family. So we find out through like flashbacks kind of that after her father died, some extended family came to like take care of her, but really what they were doing was taking control of her house and finances, and they ended up being very abusive. So at the beginning of this, Katrin has escaped. She is trying to start a new life as a scribe, and she somehow ends up at Whistling Tor, and she ends up at this like town at the base of the hill, where the people tell her that like the castle at the top of the hill is probably haunted, and that if you try to go up the hill, there are these like things in the woods that will grab you and kill you. But she also hears that the Lord of Whistling Tor, who lives at the top of the hill, is looking for a scribe because he has some things that he needs to be translated from Latin, and that they need to be translated by the end of summer. And she knows that she can do this job, and so she makes her way up there, and while she is there, she you know, learns more about the history of Whistling Tor and maybe the magic of it and the people who do or don't live there. And of course has a romance because it is Beauty and the Beast retelling. So overall, really enjoyed this. I like Katrin's character. One of the things that I like most about this is that as a Beauty and the Beast retelling, this one I think really takes pains to make sure that the beauty character, Katrin, is very independent. You know, she has her own craft, she is not a captive, she has made a choice to take this job, even though at the beginning of the story it is kind of like she doesn't have a lot of other options. Later in the story, I think that Marillier really takes pains to make sure that those external constraints that make it feel like she doesn't have other options kind of are taken away or dealt with in such a way that her decision to be at Whistling Tor and be with Anluin, who is the Lord of Whistling Tor, is really a choice that she's able to make freely because she has real independence, which is not something that we always get in a Beauty and the Beast retelling, and I appreciate it. There are some things like that, and also just the fact that that Anluin, the Lord of Whistling Tor, is like not abusive, you know, that he's just like, he's annoying and like kind of a jerk sometimes, and like doesn't always have great social skills and stuff like that because he's lived most of his life very isolated. Things like that, I'm like, I appreciate it a lot in a Beauty and the Beast retelling, but also I'm like, is the bar too low? Those are like big deals, and I'm like, wow, she isn't a captive and also he's not abusive. Incredible, you know? I'm gonna have a full review, so I'll talk more about what I liked about this and why I think this in particular worked really well for me as a retelling, because I am learning that I may be more picky about retellings than I originally thought I was. But I gave this 4 stars. All right, and then the final book that I read was Disfigured: On Fairy Tales, Disability, and Making Space by Amanda Ledoux. So this is a nonfiction book about the way that disability is portrayed in fairy tales, specifically focusing on like Grimm's fairy tales, Hans Christian Andersen fairy tales, things like that. So the way that is portrayed in those types of fairy tales and the impact that that has on Western culture, and the way that in Western culture we think about and treat disability. I really enjoyed this. I thought it was very interesting. I do feel like she kind of had like one point that she was making in this book, and then the rest of the book was just sort of giving various examples as to illustrate that point, which I think were very effective examples. I'm not sure we needed quite as many examples as we had, because I think that the point of it was fairly straightforward. But I still think it was very interesting, and I was interested to see the different examples that she was giving. I also liked that she incorporated some of her own story into it. So the author has cerebral palsy, and so would incorporate parts of her own story of, you know, diagnosis, treatment, and then the way that she was treated by other kids growing up, how she was bullied, then how things like, you know, seeing Disney princesses and the way that, you know, disabilities and things were portrayed in different Disney movies and fairy tales, how that impacted the way that she saw herself, thought about herself, and the way that other kids interacted with her. So I just think I really liked that part. I thought it was very interesting and well incorporated to further illustrate her point. But yeah, so I don't generally rate nonfiction, but I did really enjoy this, and it was also very interesting to read this while reading Heart's Blood, which is a fairy tale retelling, which does include a character who is disabled. Anluin, the Lord of Whistling Tor, is partially paralyzed on one side of his body from a childhood illness. So it was interesting to like read these at the same time. So those are all of the books that I read in August. I would love to know if you have read any of these, what your thoughts were on them. But thank you all for watching, and until next time, bye!